They said she was just the dish girl. But when the whiteboard still held fresh chalk dust, she quietly redrew all of number space, using memory, instinct, and a marker borrowed from the order counter. The back kitchen behind Stanford's dining hall always echoed with familiar sounds at night. Water gurgling down old pipes, metal clinking against metal, and the rhythmic clatter of ceramic plates being scrubbed by hand. Amelia Williams stood on an overturned plastic crate. Her apron hung too long over her knees, and the yellow gloves on her hands were too big, forcing her fingers to curve like they were holding on to something they didn't want to lose. Every plate she cleaned was placed exactly where it should be. Every sound she made was measured, and in her mind she was calculating Mod 7. No one at Stanford ever asked her name. To most, she was Linda's kid, or the dish girl on the night shift. She didn't respond, didn't complain. Just being here, 3 buildings away from the lecture halls, was enough. Because each night after the last dishes were dried, her mother, Linda Williams, assistant chef and sauce prep, would let Amelia walk around the quad for fresh air. But in truth, Amelia would sneak toward the mathematics wing, past the service corridor, and stop at the edge of lecture room 3A. The door was never locked, not once. Professor Thompson believed in habits, not locks. Amelia knew this. She also knew when class ended, 9:15 p.m. She always waited until 9:18 just to be sure. Then quietly she would push the door open. Not all the way, just enough to see. And as always, the board was still covered in chalk. A long, unfinished equation stretched across it. Strange symbols, modular subsets, exponents, gap bounds in combinatorics. Beneath it, a single question mark and a soft line, like someone started to ask a question, then gave up. She didn't understand it all, but she saw something different. A pattern. If the points were arranged in a circle, they repeated. If she tilted the space in her head, they folded like paper. She once tried folding her notebook like that. It made the shape of an 8-petal flower. That night, Amelia stepped further in. This time, she entered the classroom. In her hand, she held a cleaned egg carton lid, the kind used in the kitchen to store cracked eggs. In her pocket, a dry erase marker borrowed from the cafe counter. She didn't know where to draw. The board was too tall, the floor too clean. But sitting on the professor's desk was a stack of unused notepaper. She didn't hesitate. She took one sheet and began to draw. Before her father left for good, he had taught her how to rotate a square in her mind. If you turn it 90 degrees, he said, you'll see a door. Turn it again, and it's not a door. It's a mirror. She hadn't understood back then. But now, inside her mind, the points on the board were no longer static. They rotated, mirrored, overlapped. When the rules said they couldn't form a line, they met in other ways, through circles, folds, echoes. Amelia drew fast. Her hands, trained by the kitchen, made every stroke precise. Then came the sound of the door. A sharp beam of hallway light cut across the classroom. A tall man with gray-flecked hair stepped inside, his coat slung over one shoulder. His eyes were like glass under pressure, and his voice deep, honed by years of lectures. "You," he said. "What are you doing here?" Amelia turned slowly, not startled, just quiet. She tucked the paper beneath the desk. "Sorry," she whispered. "I was just looking at the board. This is a graduate-level classroom. You're not allowed in here." She nodded. "I understand." He stepped forward, keys jangling at his side. He reached beneath the desk and pulled out the paper. His eyes blinked once, then didn't blink again. It was a circular diagram. Inside modular points from Z Mod 9, connected with arrows and folds. At each corner, a tiny rotation mark. At the bottom, in shaky but careful handwriting. Maybe the points don't sit on a line. Maybe they remember each other across distance. Professor Thompson said nothing. He didn't know what to say. Amelia didn't smile. She didn't wait to be praised. "I won't come back again," she said softly. "I'm sorry." He nodded, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. She left quietly. The door clicked shut behind her like it had never opened. That night, in their small apartment behind the staff housing block, Amelia sat at the dinner table, flipping through a grease-stained notebook. Her mother had just returned, tossing her apron in the laundry basket. The scent of garlic and burnt onions clung to her sleeves. "You walked back alone, right?" her mother asked. "Yes," Amelia said. "Don't wander near the math buildings. They don't like that." "I just passed by," she answered. "No one saw me." Her mother sighed. "You're smart, I know that. But being smart isn't always enough. People don't notice clean dishes. They only notice when one breaks." Amelia nodded, but later that night, after her mother had fallen asleep, she unrolled a fresh sheet of brown paper saved from the kitchen. And for the first time, she tried folding the space, not with her hands, but in her mind. She imagined the chalkboard as still water, each point a ripple. And those ripples remembered each other. The next morning in the math department office, Professor Thompson sat at his desk, staring at the folded paper. He couldn't look away, not because it was correct, but because it was different. In the corner was a line he hadn't noticed before. If one point remembers another, maybe distance doesn't matter anymore. He pressed his hand to his chest. After years of detachment, his heart gave a strange, sudden thump. Not because the diagram was perfect, but because no one had taught her to draw it. And he realized what unsettled him wasn't the math. It was the question no one else had thought to ask. The sentence wasn't loud, but it slammed like a verdict. Not just against a girl with soap on her sleeves, but against every unseen mind who ever dared to listen through the door. The whiteboard had been wiped clean. Amelia returned the next night, quietly, carefully, slipping in after 9:18 as always. Her hands still smelled of lemon detergent. Her sneakers, damp from the rinse floor, squeaked faintly as she walked. But the board, it was blank. No formula, no equation, no gentle residue of chalk dust she loved to trace with her eyes. For a moment she stood in silence, notebook clutched to her chest, unsure if she had misunderstood. Maybe the seminar ended early, or maybe they had started erasing right after class now. She stepped further in, hoping, maybe on the desk, the professor had left a paper or diagram, something. Instead, she found a folded chair placed directly in front of the desk, blocking her way. On it was a printed note. "This is a private academic classroom for enrolled students and staff only. No exceptions." Typed, cold, no signature. Her fingers tightened on the notebook. The message wasn't just to keep her out. It was to make her invisible again. Back in the kitchen, Amelia said nothing. Her mother didn't ask. Linda had noticed the quiet changes, the way her daughter now rinsed plates slower, lost in thought, how she wrote strange symbols on the back of old invoices. But the kitchen was not a place for questions. It was a place for survival. Routine. Silence. That night, after the last batch of silverware was sanitized and the kitchen lights dimmed to save power, Amelia lingered near the back wall. She found a discarded cardboard flap from an egg carton box, smooth on one side, clean enough. She picked it up and began to draw. Not curves, not points, folds, one fold, then another, and another. What would happen, she wondered, if the modular number space didn't lay flat? What if each layer rotated slightly? Not just in shape, but in memory. What if each number remembered the angle from which it had once connected? It wasn't mathematics anymore. It was memory geometry. Across campus, Professor Thompson stared at the paper left on his desk, the one she'd drawn 2 nights earlier. He had not thrown it away. He had meant to. But every time he opened the drawer to discard it, his fingers paused. Something about the way the points curved, not randomly but intentionally, refused to be dismissed. He had compared it to papers from his students. Nothing matched. He ran the handwriting through the internal TA system. No match. He even asked around, casually, as if investigating misplaced lecture notes. Still, nothing. And yet deep down, he knew. The girl. The one from the kitchen. He remembered the way she'd stood in that room, not intruding, just listening, not challenging, just watching. It unsettled him. Not because she was disruptive. She wasn't. But because he had seen that look before. The look of someone who didn't need a textbook to ask the right question. Someone who saw differently. The next evening, she didn't go back. The message on the chair was clear enough. And she had promised her mother, no trouble, no wandering, no being seen. But trouble came anyway. At the edge of her shift, she heard 2 grad students chatting while waiting for their to-go dinners. You see that new diagram Professor Thompson referenced? Totally weird, like a spiral of modulo sets. Yeah, but kind of brilliant. I think it was his. No citations, though. A third voice chimed in. Lucas said he gave Thompson a draft about folding number sets a few weeks ago. Amelia froze. The name. Lucas. She had seen him before. Always early to class, always sitting near the front with a sleek tablet and ironic smile. He was the kind who noticed shoes, labels, social ladders, and the kind who never saw her. Until the day he did. The day she dropped her sketchbook while clearing dishes in the faculty lounge. He had picked it up, glanced, smirked, and handed it back, saying nothing. Now he was claiming the idea. That night, Amelia drew again, but not out of curiosity this time, out of defense. She folded the cardboard 3 times, creating ridges. Then she mapped out a new model, not Z-Mod 9 anymore, but Z-Mod 12, bent around 2 crossing axes. She added a 3rd rotational fold, layering the nodes like petals on a flower. In the corner, she wrote a new line. Not all adjacency is spatial, some is remembered. She didn't leave it on the professor's desk this time. She taped it to the bottom of the lecture hall's podium, quietly, while sweeping during kitchen close. Let them find it. Or not. She didn't need credit. She just needed truth to survive. 2 days later, Professor Thompson found it. Not by accident. He was looking. The custodial report said a kitchen staffer had swept the lecture room late, highly unusual. He returned to 3A and checked the corners, the trash bins, the podium. There it was. Another fold, another message. Same red marker. He stared at it, not in anger, but in something closer to awe. The layering wasn't decorative. It had function, a way of representing modular repetition in nested symmetry, something no published paper had ever suggested. He took it to his office, sat for a long time. And this time, he didn't hesitate. He wrote a note. To whomever left this, I don't know who you are, but your mind is uncommon. If you have more to share, leave it under my door. And if you're willing, come back. Class meets Wednesday, 7 p.m. You don't need to speak, just draw. T. Amelia read the note that night, hands trembling. It had been slipped under the kitchen door in an unmarked envelope. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't answer either. But on Wednesday night, she returned to 3A. Not at 9:18, at 6:59. They tried to wipe her presence from the board, but what she left behind couldn't be erased. Not with cloth, not with silence. The room was half full by 7:03. Students shuffled into their seats, warm coffee in hand, laptops open, screen lights flickering against the polished wood of lecture desks. None of them noticed the girl in the back corner, small, quiet, wearing a faded gray hoodie with a grease stain near the collar. Amelia didn't look like she belonged. She never had. But tonight, she didn't care, because she wasn't there to belong. She was there to see what would happen. Professor Thompson walked in 3 minutes late, which for him was practically theatrical. He didn't bring notes, no textbooks, just a single folded sheet in his hand and a piece of chalk in his coat pocket. He stepped up to the board, paused, and said nothing for a long moment. Then he wrote, in slow, deliberate letters, "What if adjacency isn't about space, but about sequence?" A murmur rippled across the room. Someone in the second row raised an eyebrow. Another typed the phrase into their notes app. Thompson turned back to the class. "We've discussed modular spaces. We've talked about avoiding linear progression in high-dimensional subsets. But what if we've misunderstood the structure of the space itself?" He began to draw, not his usual dry grids or textbook diagrams, but something different. A circular lattice, a fold, points connected by gentle arcs instead of rigid lines, a spiral rotated from within. A few students exchanged glances. Amelia held her breath, because she had drawn this, or something close. The shape was hers. He didn't mention her name. Not yet. He referred only to an anonymous contributor who had proposed a visual framework for visualizing modular adjacency, one that challenged standard definitions of proximity, one that treated number as echo, as memory, as presence folding back on itself. No one objected. No one laughed. One student leaned forward and asked, "Could this apply to polynomial bounds?" Professor Thompson smiled faintly. "Possibly. But the geometry may offer a better answer than the algebra." Someone in the back row scoffed. "Geometry? For cap sets?" Another student whispered, "It's elegant, though." Amelia's fingers trembled in her lap. Not from fear, from recognition. From something deeper. The feeling of being understood without ever having spoken. After class, a few students lingered, crowding near the board. Some were curious, some skeptical. A few tried replicating the curves on their tablets. No one turned to look at her. She slipped out the side door like usual. But this time, her heart didn't feel heavy. It felt seen. In the following days, the diagrams continued. Amelia drew late at night, not on official documents, but on the backs of inventory lists, menu sheets, even brown delivery bags. She folded them carefully, building multi-layered sequences, Z-mod 6, then 12, then 15. Each one mapped a different adjacency field. She slid them quietly under Professor Thompson's office door. Each morning she found a new one returned, same folds, but this time, Annotated. Comments, questions. Even gentle challenges scribbled in the margins. Sometimes he circled her folds and wrote, "Why this axis?" Try mirroring this one. What if adjacency decays over iterations? He never signed the pages. He didn't need to. They were building a language together, not in words, but in folds. Back in the kitchen, her mother began to notice. Amelia was using more paper towels than usual, folding things at dinner, sketching during breaks. She had stopped asking about school and started asking about patterns. Does the fryer basket always swing this way? Why do the knives reflect the light like that? Mom, if you fold a circle 3 times, where do the endpoints go? Linda didn't understand the questions. But she understood the look in her daughter's eyes. It was the same look her husband once had, years ago, when he stayed up late with an old calculator and a stack of unpaid bills, trying to find balance in numbers no one else could make sense of. He never finished school. He never got credit for his ideas, but he passed something on. And now it was waking up in Amelia. One Friday afternoon, Amelia returned to room 3A early. No class, no students, just her and the board. She stood in front of it, hands empty, brain full. She didn't need her notebook anymore. The shape was in her. She raised a piece of chalk and drew. Not a diagram this time, but a sentence. If a number remembers where it once pointed, then it will never truly be alone. She folded that idea into a curve, then layered 3 more rotations. By the time she stepped back, the board looked less like math, more like breath, like memory, wrapped in silence. Later that evening, Professor Thompson entered the room and stopped in his tracks. He stared at the board for a long time. He recognized the folds, the logic, the hands behind it, but the sentence, that stopped him. Because it wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about her. He picked up a red marker, and for the first time in 20 years, he wrote a name on the board that wasn't on the official roster. Amelia Williams, Field Notes, Theory in Progress. He left it there overnight. He didn't erase it. He wanted the room to remember. The board had her name now, but the building didn't. And when her fingers reached for the chalk again, the whispers began. Not from strangers, but from the very ones who couldn't see how far she'd come. On Monday morning, Amelia walked past the lecture hall like she had done dozens of times before. But this time, she didn't stop at the door. She went inside, and for the first time in the bright daylight and not after dark, she sat in the back row, not hiding, not waiting for silence. She sat upright, notebook open, pencil ready. No one said a word. Not yet. Professor Thompson entered at precisely 9:00 a.m., carrying a folder under one arm and a steaming cup of black coffee in the other. His eyes scanned the room like usual and paused when he saw her. Their gazes met. He gave a brief nod. Not grand, not ceremonial, but enough. She belonged, at least in his eyes, but not in everyone's. Is that the kitchen girl? Someone whispered 3 rows ahead. I thought she just cleaned here. Why is she sitting in on a graduate-level course? Professor Thompson heard it too. He didn't respond, but his chalk struck the board just a bit louder than usual. Today, he said, we explore rotational adjacency in modular sets, and we begin with a diagram proposed by one of you. He turned to the board and sketched the spiral Amelia had drawn days earlier. Carefully, faithfully. Then, without turning back, he said, Amelia Williams, if you'd like to help us walk through it, the board is yours. The room went still. All eyes turned to her. She hesitated. Not out of fear, but weight. The weight of being seen, really seen, for the first time. She rose, stepped down the rows toward the board, and took the chalk from his hand. It was heavier than she expected, or maybe her fingers were just trembling. She drew. It wasn't a lecture. It was a memory. She retraced the spiral curve, explaining in soft, focused words how each point in Z mod 12 could be paired not just by position, but by remembered transition. It's not just the gap, she said. It's how the number got there. The root matters. Someone asked, "Do you mean adjacency depends on path history?" She nodded. It remembers where it used to point, even if it's not there anymore. The room was silent. Then, someone clapped. Not loud, just once, but it spread. And Amelia stepped back. Not everyone was pleased. Later that afternoon, Professor Thompson received an email from the department chair. Subject: non-registered participants in graduate seminars. Body: please clarify the nature of the individual attending Math 321. Is she formally enrolled, auditing, or otherwise authorized? We've received concerns from students and faculty alike. While we support community outreach, standards must be maintained. Standards. He read that word 3 times, as if ideas had to pass through security before being allowed to speak. Back in the kitchen, Amelia was drying spoons when one of the upper-year students from the math department approached the counter. He didn't order food. He just leaned over the glass and said, "You shouldn't be in the room." Amelia blinked. "I didn't mean to take anyone's place." "It's not about that," he said. "It's about merit, process. We work for years to be in those rooms." She looked at him evenly. "I know." "Then why do you keep showing up?" She paused, then answered with a sentence she didn't plan. "Because the board doesn't care who cleaned the floors." He didn't reply. He just left. Professor Thompson called her in that evening. Not formally, just a quiet knock on the side door of the lecture hall after hours. "I won't ask you to stop," he said, "but they're watching now." "I don't need to be listed," Amelia said. He studied her. "You're not trying to prove anything, are you?" She shook her head. "No, I just want to see what it looks like when it's done." Thompson smiled, the kind of smile that came from memory, not pride. "My old advisor once told me, the best mathematicians aren't the ones who explain best. They're the ones who ask questions no one thought needed asking." He handed her a new stack of graph paper. "Keep folding," he said. "But be careful. Ideas are fragile when they're young." That night, she folded until her fingers were sore. She mapped Z mod 16 through a memory-preserving algorithm, points not just echoing across space, but adapting based on prior adjacency. She called it memory-weighted modularity. She didn't know if it was right, but it felt like something that remembered, and that was enough to keep going. 2 days later, the board in room 3A was found with a message scribbled in red. "Genius without process is just noise." It wasn't signed, but Amelia recognized the handwriting. Lucas. She erased it, quietly, without fanfare. Then she wrote beneath it, "Then listen harder." She didn't have a school ID, she didn't have a seat in the front row. But when the draft appeared, the one that outlined the impossible, they tried to erase her name before anyone else could read it. The folder was thin, but what it carried weighed more than anyone knew. Professor Thompson placed it gently on the conference table in the faculty lounge, between a cold coffee and a cracked whiteboard marker. The pages inside were carefully printed, clean diagrams, neat margins, and a title that gave nothing away. Memory-preserved structures in modular space. The author line was blank. He had removed her name. For her protection. For now. The department's weekly review meeting had already begun. 3 faculty members and 2 doctoral students sat around the table, some yawning, some pretending to read the documents in front of them. Then Lucas walked in. Late, as always, smiling, as always. He scanned the folder, saw the top diagram, and stopped. That was his smile vanishing, because he recognized it, and it wasn't his. He had seen that curve once, half drawn on the back of a paper bag taped to the kitchen fridge. The bag hadn't been his. The spiral hadn't been his. But if he didn't say something now, it never would be. "This looks familiar," Lucas said, casually flipping a page. "I submitted something similar to Thompson last month." The room turned. Professor Klein, head of the review board, looked up. "You're claiming this work?" "I'm saying parts of it evolved from conversations I had with Professor Thompson," Lucas replied smoothly. "Informal, but real." Professor Thompson said nothing, but his eyes hardened. The meeting adjourned 20 minutes later. The folder was collected, and the paper was placed under internal review, which, at Stanford, often meant buried quietly until no one remembers who wrote it. That evening, Amelia came to room 3A early. She had another diagram in hand, her most advanced yet. It folded modular sets through layered reflections, a kind of echo logic that she couldn't yet name, but could feel. The board was blank, but the air wasn't. Something was off. She walked to the front row and noticed her last diagram, the one she had slipped under the professor's door, was no longer on his desk. She sat, waited. At 7:04, Professor Thompson walked in, looking like he hadn't slept. He didn't greet her, didn't nod, just sat at his desk, opened a drawer, and sighed. Then handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a printed copy of her paper. But the title was changed, and the author line was gone. "I didn't authorize this," he said quietly. "But the faculty, someone is trying to appropriate parts of the work." She looked at him. She wasn't angry, not yet, just steady. "Do you believe in it?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time, then said, "I believe it scares them." That night, Amelia didn't draw. She walked. 3 laps around the edge of the campus. Past the dorms she didn't live in. Past the labs she couldn't enter. Past the statue of Euler no one seemed to notice. Then she went home and took out all her pages, notebooks, napkins, folded diagrams, grocery receipts, everything. She spread them across the floor like constellations, and for the first time, she labeled them, not just with numbers, but with memory. Each diagram had a birth moment, a meaning, a place it first unfolded. This one, after washing dishes with Mom on Tuesday. That one, when she overheard students discussing echo matrices. Another, drawn after Lucas smirked and said nothing. They were hers, not because she wrote them, but because they had grown in her. The next morning, Professor Thompson found a folded paper under his door. It had no math, no diagram, just a sentence. "You don't have to fight for me. Just don't forget where the first fold came from." He didn't need a name. He didn't need proof. But he needed to do something. So he walked down the hall, turned left at the mathematics archive room, and placed her entire folder, unedited, into a locked file marked Independent Work, Williams A. Unofficial, unrecognized, but archived. Safe. but safety doesn't last. 3 days later, the faculty portal published a preliminary framework by Lucas Bell, titled Iterative Folding in Modular Adjacency, a Preliminary Pathway. The diagrams were cleaner now, digitized, but Amelia recognized the core. They had trimmed her spirals, sanitized the messiness, polished the imperfections, and deleted the memory. Students began talking, not many, but enough. Wasn't that the chalkboard design from a few weeks ago? I thought that came from that girl. Which girl? The one who works in the kitchen, I think. Marissa, a doctoral student in combinatorics, and one of the few who had actually watched Amelia draw, printed both papers and laid them side by side. She saw it immediately, the stolen fold, the exact mirrored node, and the missing signature. So she walked into Thompson's office, slammed both pages on his desk, and said, "You're letting them erase her." He didn't answer, not right away. He picked up a red pen, and on the corner of the cleaned-up version, he wrote one name, Amelia Williams. Then below it, origin point. That evening, in room 3A, Amelia returned for her usual seat. But something had changed. On the board was no math, just a quote, written in bold red. The first fold always remembers. Underneath, her name, her full name. Some students stared when she entered. Others nodded. One girl whispered, "She's the one." Amelia sat down, opened her notebook, and started drawing again. Not to defend, not to fight, but to remember, and to keep folding forward. The university was built from stone, but its reputation was built from the things it was willing to bury. And this girl, with grease on her sleeves and math in her hands, was never part of their plan. Monday morning arrived gray, like wet ash. A thin rain fell over Stanford's walkways, blurring the posters on the math department bulletin board and streaking the bronze plaques on the walls. In the highest floor of the administrative tower, a meeting had begun. A quiet one. No announcement, no invitation, just 6 people in a soundproof conference room reviewing 2 things, a video and a folded note. The video was grainy, security footage from room 3A. It showed a girl stepping up to the whiteboard. No badge, no registration, no clearance. And yet, drawing. Fluidly, fluently. Lines that curved like breath, not formulas. The note was simpler, just a sentence scrawled in red ink. The first fold always remembers. And beneath it, Amelia Williams. "I don't like this," said Dean Hargrave. "She's not enrolled. She's not even applying," added Professor Lin. "This could expose the department," said another. "If the press finds out we ignored this level of insight from a kitchen worker?" Silence. Then a quiet voice. "Professor Klein, head of curriculum. Or worse, if we accepted her." In room 3A, the board had been wiped clean again, but not by the janitorial staff. Someone had erased Amelia's name before sunrise. She arrived just after 7 a.m., notebook in hand, expecting the quote, the fold, the recognition. It was gone. So was the red chalk. She stood in front of the board for a long time, unsure whether to rewrite it or let it vanish. Then a soft voice came from behind. "I kept a picture of it." She turned. Marissa stood in the doorway, phone in hand. "I knew they'd erase it." Amelia nodded. "Why does it matter so much to them?" she asked. Marissa looked at her. "Because you weren't supposed to exist on that board, Not without a file, not without permission. Back in the admin tower, a letter was being drafted. It would be polite, firm, non-confrontational. It would begin. Dear Ms. Williams, we appreciate your informal interest in our mathematics department. And would end. But for the integrity of our programs and the fairness owed to all enrolled students, we must ask that you refrain from attending classes or accessing departmental materials. It was dated, it was printed, and it was left unsigned. For now. Professor Thompson read the draft that evening, then folded it twice, then burned it in the sink of the break room. The ashes curled like forgotten theorems. He had made his decision, and the consequences no longer mattered. That night, Amelia didn't sleep. She rearranged her diagrams again, this time mapping them not by sequence or rotation, but by erasure. Which diagrams had been removed from the board? Which ones had been rewritten by others? Which ones had names stripped? Which ones had gone missing altogether? The map began to form, not of numbers, but of silences. She saw it clearly now. It wasn't just about proving something. It was about surviving something. Tuesday afternoon, Lucas gave an impromptu presentation during a grad seminar. He called it a theoretical refinement of his earlier work. He showed curves, her curves, but bent differently, flattened, stripped of memory. Just geometry now, safe, dry. I've formalized the folds, he said, removed the ambiguity. No need for narrative or metaphor. Someone in the back raised a hand. What about the adjacency memory model? Lucas paused. That was a poetic idea, not mathematically rigorous. Marissa stood. So was calculus before it was formalized. Lucas smiled thinly. But I formalized this. Professor Thompson was in the corner, saying nothing, but listening. That night, Amelia wrote one sentence in her notebook. If you flatten memory, you flatten meaning. Then she drew a fold no one had seen before, a triple echo spiral through 4 modular layers. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't elegant. It was true. And that was enough. Wednesday morning, room 3A was full before class began. Word had spread. Not publicly, not loudly, but something was happening. A fold, a rumor, a girl. Amelia arrived last, not hiding, just quiet. She took her seat. Professor Thompson entered, set down his papers, and faced the class. Before we begin, he said, I'd like to acknowledge something. He turned to the board and wrote, Memory is adjacency across time. No citation, no title, but the entire room knew. It was hers. But outside the room, an email was already being sent. To central administration, to legal, to security. The subject line, Unauthorized student creating disruption in room 3A. Attached was a still frame of Amelia at the board, and a draft policy. The first sentence read, Stanford reserves the right to restrict access to all non-enrolled individuals from participating in any departmental activity, regardless of contribution. And yet, that same night, a new note appeared under Professor Thompson's door. Not handwritten, typed, formal, but unmistakably hers. It read, If the system cannot allow memory to exist without permission, then maybe it's the system that needs folding. It was drawn in silence, with hands that had never held a diploma. But when the chalk settled and the board was full, no one in the room could pretend they understood math the same way again. It started with a fold, not on the board, but on a napkin. Amelia was in the corner of the staff break room, the kind with flickering lights and a microwave that always smelled faintly of burnt popcorn. Her shift had ended. Her mother was prepping trays for the next day. The world around her was clanging, moving, rushing, but in front of her, the napkin was still, and on it, she had drawn the beginning of something strange. 3 modular spaces, layered, one with symmetry, one with decay, and one with memory, not between points, but between transitions. Not what the numbers were, not where they sat, but how they remembered getting there. It was the first time Amelia had visualized adjacency as time-dependent. She folded the napkin in half, then in thirds. The image curved, warped, reappeared. Certain points now aligned across layers that didn't exist in any textbook. The folds reshaped the math. She wasn't solving a problem anymore. She was changing what the problem even was. That night she returned to room 3A. Not as a visitor, as an instigator. No class was scheduled. The lights were dim. The board was clean. She stepped forward, chalk in one hand, the folded napkin in the other, and she began to draw. There was no plan, no script, only movement. She started with the base, Z mod 9, a circular lattice. Then she layered a spiral that dipped through the center, connecting every third node, but in a rotational offset. Then she introduced a fold, a vertical axis that bent space like origami, flipping adjacent numbers into mirrored time intervals. But the key wasn't in the shapes, it was in the labels. Each node wasn't marked with a number. It was marked with a memory. Echo from step 2. Transition decay from step 5. Self-return via modular inversion. It looked like a galaxy written in code. When she finished, the board was filled corner to corner. Then she stepped back and wrote, in the bottom corner, "This space doesn't store values. It stores how values became." She left without waiting. No name, no announcement, no folder on a desk, just the board, still warm with chalk, waiting for someone to see. The next morning, Professor Thompson entered room 3A to prepare his lecture. He stopped in the doorway. The board stole his breath, not just because it was brilliant, but because it was new, entirely, undeniably new. He saw things he didn't recognize, curves that bent across dimensions not described in his lectures, relationships between numbers that weren't numerical, but historical. It wasn't a solution. It was a new language. He sat down and stared. By noon, photos of the diagram were spreading, first among graduate students, then via private faculty group chats. By 3 p.m., it had reached the Mathematics Research Slack channel. Someone captioned it, "Anyone know whose work this is?" Replies flooded in. Lucas? Nope, too elegant. Thompson's? He doesn't use echo mapping. AI generated? No shot. Look at that fold logic. Then quietly, wasn't that girl in the kitchen drawing something like this? That afternoon, Amelia was called to the back office, but not by Thompson, by someone from the administration, a woman in a navy blazer. 2 printed pages sat on the desk between them. One was a draft expulsion notice, not from a class, but from all academic spaces on campus. The other was a consent form, offering limited recognition in exchange for signing away authorship. Amelia stared at both. She didn't speak. Not yet. Then slowly she pulled something from her pocket. The napkin. Creased. Stained slightly with tomato sauce. She unfolded it carefully and placed it next to the expulsion form. then looked the administrator in the eye. "This napkin is older than both your pages." The woman said nothing, just collected the forms and left. That evening, Amelia returned to room 3A. The diagram was still on the board, but something had changed. Someone, likely Thompson, had added a title above it. Echogeometry, a proposed framework by A. Williams. And beneath that, filed under Unregistered Genius. The next day, a student posted a photo of the board on Twitter with the caption, "This isn't math, this is poetry." It went viral. Mathematicians from other universities weighed in. Whoever drew this isn't just solving a problem. They're redefining adjacency itself. One comment stood out. "Where's the published version? I want to cite it." Someone replied, "She's not allowed to publish. She's a kitchen worker." That comment also went viral. Within 48 hours, Stanford's press office was flooded with interview requests. Who is Amelia Williams? Is it true she's not a student? Why hasn't the department acknowledged her work? The administration issued no statement, but Professor Thompson did. He published a short blog post on his personal site. Mathematics doesn't ask for credentials. It asks for clarity. Amelia Williams didn't walk into our classroom. She walked into our blind spots and redrew the space we thought we understood. That night, a reporter from the Chronicle of Higher Education knocked on the service entrance of the kitchen. Linda Williams answered the door. She wore her apron. Her hands smelled of garlic and steel wool. "Can we speak to your daughter?" the reporter asked. Linda hesitated, then turned and called, "Amelia? Someone's asking about your folds." From behind a stack of dish racks, the girl stepped forward, still in her t-shirt, still holding a notebook, and still, unbelievably, smiling. Some students followed the syllabus. She followed something else. Echoes, folds, and the invisible paths walked by those no one ever welcomed, but who arrived anyway. The chalkboard was erased again, not out of malice, but out of routine. Room 3A had a cleaning schedule, and the maintenance staff didn't know that the diagram drawn 2 nights ago had made headlines in 4 countries. All they saw was a board full of curves. Beautiful, maybe, but uncredited. So they cleaned, and just like that, the board was blank again. Across campus, Amelia sat in the back of the dining hall, surrounded by noise. Trays clattering, soda fountains hissing, the dull hum of student conversation. She stared at her notebook, which was now so full it could barely close. But she didn't write. Not today. She just listened. To the sounds, to the spaces between them, and to the quiet inside herself. The place where the diagrams came from. Meanwhile, in Professor Thompson's office, a meeting was taking place. Marissa had brought 3 other graduate students. All of them had seen Amelia's work. All of them knew the truth. And now, all of them wanted to help. "Call it what it is," Marissa said. "It's a new framework for adjacency. And it didn't come from the journals. It came from a kitchen." Thompson nodded. "She's not just revising theory," said one student. "She's reshaping it. Spatial adjacency based on temporal memory. That's not just a contribution. It's a lens." They decided that day to start compiling every known diagram Amelia had drawn. Not to co-author, not to formalize, but to map her logic. On her terms. They called it the Williams layering model. Unofficial, unpublished, unstoppable. But outside the math department, resistance was growing. A leaked memo from administration read, "Recognizing uncredentialed contributions poses reputational risk. Consider internal resolution. Do not endorse publicly until review is complete." Translation: Wait it out. Let it die quietly. But it wouldn't. Because that same night someone posted a photo of a new diagram, drawn in sidewalk chalk outside the west entrance to the mathematics building. It was unmistakable. 3 spirals, 1 fold, a signature in red, for those who were never on the list. No one saw who drew it, but everyone knew. By the end of the week, Amelia began receiving letters, not from institutions, from people. A high school dropout from Chicago, a retired janitor from Mumbai, a girl in Lagos who taught herself algebra from library books. Each letter said the same thing in different words. I saw your folds. I understood them. Some attached sketches. Others shared theorems. One simply wrote, I thought I was alone. I'm not. Amelia sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, reading each letter slowly. Then she took out a roll of butcher paper, unfolded it across the table, and began to draw again. But this time, it wasn't modular sets. It was people. Each point on the page represented someone who had written to her, their stories, their folds, their memories. She mapped them like constellations. Some were close, some far. Some echoed across layers. She called it the map of those who never followed a straight line. Meanwhile, Lucas was unraveling. His revised paper, the one published without Amelia's name, had drawn scrutiny. Not from Stanford, from mathematicians abroad. Experts in modular theory were asking questions. How had he derived fold logic? Why were his transitions inconsistent? Could he explain the temporal decay curves? He couldn't, because he hadn't drawn them. Amelia had, and the academic world was beginning to sense it. In room 3A, Professor Thompson stood at the board, holding a new set of chalks Amelia had left him, each labeled by hand. Symmetry, echo, memory, distance. He used each color in turn, walking the class through a problem no one had solved in 2 decades. By the end, the board was full of curves. Then he stepped aside. You've just seen adjacency not in space, he said, but in memory. A pause. Then he added, and the person who first drew this doesn't have a university ID. In the following weeks, things shifted. Quietly, subtly, but permanently. A lecture at MIT referenced the Williams fold. A seminar in Berlin debated memory-weighted adjacency. An independent researcher in Brazil published a visual proof based on Amelia's sidewalk spiral. None of it was formal. None of it was official. But it was real. Amelia had redrawn the space, and people were walking through it, one fold at a time. Late one evening, she returned to room 3A, alone. The lights were off, the board empty. She stood in front of it with her chalk, not red this time, just white. And she wrote, some of us don't walk in straight lines. That's not failure. That's geometry. Then she added one final point on the board, not on any axis, just where it felt right. Then she smiled, because the space remembered her, even if the system still pretended it didn't. She didn't ask to speak. She never raised her hand. But when they tried to remove her name from the slides, the math itself refused to forget her. The invitation came printed in blue ink on thick ivory cardstock. Stanford Mathematics Spring Colloquium Topic. New Perspectives on Modular Adjacency. Speaker, Professor Elijah Thompson, with selected contributions from graduate students. It was the kind of formal academic event that rarely made headlines, but this time, it would. Because everyone knew what the real topic was. It wasn't just about adjacency. It was about her. When Professor Thompson handed Amelia a copy of the invitation, he didn't say anything. Just watched her eyes move across the page. There was no mention of her name, no credit, no footnote. Just the vague phrase, "Selected contributions." She read it slowly, then folded the paper twice and placed it on the counter beside the industrial sink. Thompson spoke first. "I didn't write the invite." "I know," she said. "They said the board wouldn't approve it if I used your name." "I know." "They're afraid of the precedent." "I'm not," Amelia said quietly. "I know," he whispered. Over the next few days, preparations for the colloquium intensified. Graduate students prepared visuals, a tech team digitized diagrams, and someone, no one would admit who, took Amelia's name off every single figure. They redrew her spirals, straightened her folds, smoothed her asymmetries, until the math looked clean, predictable, unrecognizable. Marissa saw it first. She stormed into Thompson's office with her laptop. "They edited her out," she said. Thompson scrolled through the slides. The logic was still there, but the life was gone. "She didn't draw this," he muttered. "No," Marissa snapped. "She lived it." That night, Amelia didn't go home. She stayed in room 3A, alone. She redrew every erased diagram by hand, not on paper, on the walls. Using chalk, she created a visual archive that stretched from corner to corner, fold by fold, layer by layer, no symmetry trimmed, no memory erased. By midnight, the room looked less like a classroom and more like a cathedral, a sacred space of unspoken knowledge. The next morning, Thompson walked into the room and froze. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway for a long time, the early light casting pale shadows over the folds. When he finally moved, he stepped to the center of the room and whispered, "This is the lecture." Amelia looked up. "I'm not allowed to give one." He nodded. "Then I'll speak. But we'll both draw." The day of the colloquium arrived with soft spring rain and nervous conversation. Faculty, grad students, visiting scholars, a few journalists, even a camera crew from a science education channel. Thompson adjusted his tie in the mirror. He hated ties. Marissa checked the slides one last time. Still no credit to Amelia. And Amelia? She sat in the back wearing a gray sweater with chalk stains on the cuffs. No stage, no mic, no name tag. Just a piece of folded graph paper in her pocket, the first diagram she ever drew. The auditorium lights dimmed. Thompson stepped to the podium. "Today," he said, "we'll look at adjacency through a new lens." Slide 1 appeared, a clean modular grid. Traditional representations assume distance is static, that adjacency is defined solely by proximity in space. Slide 2, a slightly curved modular ring. But what if it isn't? What if adjacency remembers its path? What if a number recalls the fold that placed it there? He paused, then clicked to slide 3, one of Amelia's earliest diagrams. But this time, the signature was back. A. Williams. A murmur moved through the room. One person clapped, then another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause. Thompson let it settle, then said, "This framework called echogeometry comes from a contributor not officially enrolled in any course." He turned. "Amelia Williams, would you join me?" A spotlight moved. People turned. She didn't stand immediately. Then, slowly, she rose and walked. Not to the podium, to the board. She picked up a piece of chalk and drew. What she drew wasn't perfect. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't even complete. But it was real. A multi-layered spiral of modular points, connected by arrows that curved with time. She labeled one point, beginning, then another, far away, still connected. And a final one, even here, I remember. Silence fell over the room. Not of confusion, of reverence. When the colloquium ended, people lined up to speak to her. Not Thompson, not the grad students. Her. Someone from MIT asked for a preprint. A professor from Oxford offered a visiting research spot. The Science Channel host asked to interview her on camera. She said the same thing to each. I'm still folding. That night, an anonymous user uploaded a video titled, "They tried to erase her name, but math remembered." It showed the full lecture. It went viral in under 24 hours. And the top comment read, "Genius isn't who holds the mic. Genius is who holds the chalk after you've tried to take it away." They built maps from textbooks. She built one from memory. And when they asked where she had learned, she pointed not to a classroom, but to the places where stars never formed straight lines. Months passed. The classroom was no longer empty after hours. Not because Amelia was there, because others were. A girl who had dropped out of high school now sat at the front row with an old calculator and a broken pen. A former custodian from the engineering building brought his worn notebook filled with equations no one had believed. A boy who had failed his linear algebra exam twice now came in early, not to impress, but to understand. They weren't students, not officially, but they had been invited by her. Amelia had never asked for a platform, but the world gave her one anyway. MIT sent her a scholarship offer. Oxford called her work the most original framework in modern combinatorics. A tech firm offered her a six-figure salary to visualize complexity. She said no to all of it. Because what she had wasn't a career, it was a language. And languages don't belong in vaults. They belong in the mouths of those who were never taught to speak. One afternoon, Professor Thompson knocked gently on the kitchen entrance of the dining hall. Linda Williams opened the door, apron still tied, sleeves wet from the sink. "Is she here?" he asked. Linda smiled. "She's in the back, with her kids." He blinked. "Her?" Linda tilted her head toward the dining area. There, sitting around a long table, were 7 children. Not hers, not by blood, but by fold. They were the ones who had followed her sidewalk spirals, the ones who had written her letters, the ones who had never believed they belonged, until she drew the path. The room was quiet except for the sound of chalk tapping. Amelia stood at a small board, drawing slow loops with a group of kids around her. "This one isn't about numbers," she said. "It's about choices." She drew 2 points. Most systems ask, "What's the shortest path?" She drew a straight line between them. "But sometimes," she continued, "the strongest path is curved." She connected the points again, this time in a wide arc. One boy raised his hand. "Like stars?" She smiled. "Exactly like stars." Elsewhere on campus, a small exhibition was unveiled. The Williams Collection, unofficial but attended by mathematicians from around the world. Each panel displayed one of her original diagrams, unedited. Each had a caption not written by faculty but by Amelia herself. One read, "Drawn after I burned my hand on the stove, but kept thinking about echo decay." Another, "This one came from watching my mom scrub trays. The repetition became adjacency." A third, under a spiral of red and gray, "For everyone who was told, That's not how it works. On the final day of the exhibit, a quiet moment unfolded. Amelia stood before her first diagram, the napkin version, now framed. Thompson approached. He looked older now, more tired, but also lighter. "I owe you more than I can say," he told her. "You gave me back the part of math I thought I'd lost." She looked at him. "You gave me the room to draw." He chuckled softly. "I just unlocked the door." She turned to the diagram. "Do you ever wonder where the folds come from?" she asked. "All the time." "I think they come from pain." He looked at her, surprised. "But pain that learned to speak in curves." Weeks later, Amelia received a brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page, a scanned note from decades ago. Scrawled handwriting, a crude drawing of an early modular spiral, signed E.J. Carter, kitchen staff, class of 1972. No one had known. He'd never published, never spoken, but someone, somewhere, had folded before. She placed the note on her wall, then drew a connecting line. Her map grew by one more memory. Years passed. The board in room 3A remained, not as a schedule, but as a living record. Each person who entered added one fold, one echo, one story. Some were complex, some were broken. All of them mattered, because in the end, Amelia hadn't just changed how numbers related, she had changed how people related to knowing. She didn't just redraw space, she redrew belonging. On the day of her first published book, a young student asked her during a talk, "Did you ever wish you had taken the normal path?" She paused, then answered, "I did, for a long time. But then I realized I was never lost. I was just following a map that hadn't been drawn yet." The final page of her book contained no equation, no theorem, just this sentence. Not every genius walks in through the front door. Some find a crack in the back wall and leave the most beautiful marks where no one thought to look. Thank you for walking with Amelia all the way to the final line. This story isn't just about mathematics or the spirals on a board. It's about the quiet courage of a soul never invited into the room, who walked in anyway, and redrew the space everyone else thought was already mapped. If you've ever felt unqualified, unwelcome, unheard, then this story was always meant for you, because sometimes the most beautiful branches don't grow straight, and the most extraordinary minds never enter through the front door. So keep folding, keep drawing, and if the world won't say your name, let your work speak instead. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for believing that sometimes even a dishwasher girl can redraw the shape of everything.